reading of artists. So we've got our activity set up. We've got our template set up. I've pushed to GitHub if you need to reference anything. So we'll go back to our artist list KT file. So we're connecting to the database when we open up our list activity. We'll come back, we'll enable this in a minute. We'll talk about this adapter. And we've set up our mutable list of type artists that we can fill as we iterate through our collection. For our recycler view, we want to bind it to we need to state that it's going to use a linear layout. I'm not exactly sure why we need to do this, quite honestly, because our template already has a linear layout. But we're saying that the recycler view will use the linear layout. So now we'll want to set up our query. So we've already got a database instance here that we've created and we're not using right now. So we're going to run a query on our artist collection. And let's say we want to sort the artist by name. So we can add an order by clause, much like we could do in .NET when we're running an elite query. There's an order by. So we want to order by artist name in ascending order. Oops, sorry, that's the second part of the parameter. And it prompts us to make a reference to the query. So there's 3 different query namespaces, and we want the first one from the Firebase. We want the Firebase Firestore query, because that's the type of query we're running. So we'll have that reference. It'll import Firestore's query. So we'll come back. I said I'd come back to this adapter class. So we're going to need to use a class called a Firebase Recycler Adapter. Have you worked with adapter classes in Java before? Or is this a new thing? Okay, so we'll maybe take a minute and look at. So we're looking at this class. It's called a Firestore Recycler Adapter. And I've put this link up because it's a pretty good description. There's actually a quick video here. So you can see that's sort of doing what we want. We have this data in Firestore, and we want to bind it to this recycler view. So the recycler has an adapter class. And basically what the adapter does is it lets us watch the model for changes, so our data can be updated if the underlying data changes. So the adapter is kind of like the class that's used for binding our query result with our recycler. So we're going to need an instance of one of these. We're going to need an instance of one of these classes. And one of the other important points is we have a start listening and a stop listening method, which runs a callback, which is checking our database for changes. So we're going to implement this Firebase Firestore Recycler Adapter and override methods like start and stop. So where do we want to do this? So outside of my OnCreate, we'll come back. We'll need to write some more code here. We're going to declare a couple of inner classes that are needed to read and bind data. So these are declared inside. So they're inner classes. They're inside of our artist list class. They're not outside. So we'll call this our artist adapter. So we're creating the class. I created a reference here, but it gave us error because that class didn't exist. So we're going to create this class. So this class will be of type Firestore Recycler Adapter. We use an internal constructor with some options. So this adapter is going to expect data of type artist. Sorry. I'll have to break this on a separate line so it's a bit more readable. We're also going to use another class called the view holder. I'll explain what that is. So it doesn't know what this Firestore Recycler options is. Nor this view holder. We're going to need to create that view holder class. So this Firestore Recycler options, there's basically two methods inside. There's one method for create and one method for bind. So what do we do when this is created, and then what happens as we're binding each element in our recycler? Just going to double check my syntax. Right, sorry. Yes, whoops, that one should come out. The adapter needs two things, the class, as well as this view holder class, which we're going to define. So that would be the private inner class. Sorry? I know. So I need to reference the Android view. And for our recycler view, we need to make that reference. So there's a constructor creating the class. I'm just thinking about where. So are we missing a dependency here? Bear with me for just a second. Yeah, so we'll need, okay. We need another dependency that we don't have in our, so we need to implement we need something from the Firebase UI. So that's under Gradle scripts. It's the second one, the one that says module app. Okay. So we need the Firebase UI Firestore. That's why I didn't have that dependency, which is why I wasn't getting prompt to import my recycler. I think the class, what we need is, I think the latest is 4.3.1, if not, it will tell us. So now it's asking me to sync because we've added this dependency again on line 38. So we're not going to be able to use that Firebase recycler class without this dependency. It's part of this library. So I think now I should have the option to import this class. Right, so once we add the dependency, now my import of the Firestore recycler options is available. So I can import this. So I also now need to do an import here. So it imports both the recycler options and recycler adapter. It'll add those two imports to lines 8 and 9. I'm getting an error here because if this class is going to inherit from Firestore recycler adapter, we have to override the method. We have to implement that interface. So there are methods here we have to override. And that's our create and bind method. We can't create a class of this type if there's no bind method and no create method. So we're going to override. Yep. Yep. So we will need this in order to be able to use the recycler view and bind it. So com.firebase UI : Firebase -UI -Firestore : 4.3.1. It should be, I believe so. So try it again, and once you change it, you'll get a sync now message here. So we'll need to basically link to that library before you can use it. So we want to override. You can see here, we want the onBind and onCreate. So I'll just select onBind, and then I'll also override the onCreate. So now my error goes away. We're not doing anything inside these methods yet, but now we've implemented the interface properly. So again, if you just start typing override, you should get in the context menu pop-ups for the bind view and create view. But okay, in that case, see if you try adding the import manually, and let's see if that recognizes it, if you add it manually. Yeah, so here's, so copy the import statement on that I've highlighted. So it's the same as the one below, just change the word options to the word adapter. So just copy that and let me know if it is accepted or do you get an error. So you have the recycler options import already there. So if you copy it and change the word, and does it, it's okay? All right. Okay, so yeah, that's what we need to override. When you override these two methods, you get that error because it can't inherit from that interface or inherit from that class if it does not implement a bind and a create method with this signature. So again, I'll just undo that just to show you again how to implement. If you just start typing override, the two methods pop up. And you can just either select them with your mouse or hit enter. So I've overridden the onBind and I've overridden the onCreate. So I should be able to build now. Nothing's really happening yet. But we're just in the process of setting this up. So we'll deal with the onCreate first. So what we want to do when we create an instance of this class, we want to bind our RecyclerView to our layout file. So we're in effect instantiating our layout file. And there's a particular method for doing this. We actually see it. We don't see it here. So in my onCreate, I'll take out this to do not implemented because we'll replace that with actual code. So in here, so when creating instantiate the item artist.xml template. So we're going to use this class called the layout inflator. And inflation basically means instantiation. We have this layout file that's sitting over here in our library. We want to use it. So we're going to call the layout inflator class. Say layoutinflator.from. Our parent context, and we call the inflate method. And then the inflate method wants to know which layout file are we inflating? Which layout file are we instantiating? So which one would we pick here? There's 3 layout files. Yeah, it's our item artist. Right? It's this little kind of partial template here. It's not a full view. It's just a template view for each row of our recycler. We want to inflate it into the parent. I'm not going to worry about our last property, but it's false. Are we attaching it to our root layout, which is no. And then we would just return artist view holder in this view. So there's our OnCreate. So we don't need to do this for every element in the recycler. We only need to do it when it's created. So this will only happen, this only happens once. The onBind, this is going to happen for every document in our query. So this is going to happen repeatedly for every single item that's bound to our recycler. This method will get called. So in here, in our view holder, we're going to set up a method that will populate our two text views. And then this bind method will call that repeatedly for every item in the list. Again, I'll just build here to make sure I don't see any red, so I should be able to compile. I should be able to run the app again. We won't see any changes yet. Unfortunately, there's a lot of steps we have to go through. There's not really any way to do this partially now. We have to do the full setup before we're going to see any noticeable change in our app. I can run it again, should load my main activity. So we're still not binding yet. We've done some of the setup to bind. So our query is actually running. But it's not fully finished binding to our recycler view yet. So inside of my view holder now, I want to set up a function that will take in the name and genre and populate those two values to the two text views we've got here. So I'll create an internal function. I'll call it DisplayArtist, and it'll take in two strings. The artist name as a string. So here's what this method's going to do. It's going to populate the name and genre text views in the layout template that we inflated down on line 62. So we're going to find our first text view. And we'll need to reference the text view class. now we have references to these two text views in the current item. So this is the function that's going to get called repeatedly from our bind, because our bind is going to run for each element in our query result. It's going to call this function, pass in the two string values, and those two string values are going to get rendered out in the appropriate views. So we've got this method. So that's referencing these two items. So here's our text view name and text view genre in our layout template. So we want to populate each one of these for every element in our data set. So now inside of our bind, we need to take the current artist in the list and then call our display function. So I'll wipe out my method stub in the body. So we want to pass the current artist values to the display function. Oops. So we'll call our artist view holder sorry. Oh, okay. So P0 is the artist view holder, sorry. So then we want to pass in our artist name. I guess these could be null, so I'll convert them to string. So these parameter names were auto-generated by when we overrode the method. So P0 is our view holder, so that's this class. P1 is the index, so if we want to know what number are we, let's say we wanted to output our indexes. That's our P1 variable, would tell us where are we in the list. And P2 is then the corresponding artist object. So we're going to pass in the name and genre over here. So it's most of what we need to do, but not yet. If we look at the code and we run it now, I can build it. We're still not going to get any data, even though I think what we have here we will need. Instantiate our layout file. As we're looping through, pass each artist name and genre. and populate those values. But if we run it, it's still not going to actually display anything. Any ideas why it won't display any data yet? Well, we're actually calling it here. So as we're binding, as the adapter's binding, which it does repeatedly. So this happens in a loop automatic. We don't need a looping structure. It will automatically loop. Yep, so that the inflate adds it to the recycler view is in our detail layout. And when our adapter gets created, we are inflating, we are attaching our little XML partial template to the recycler. So that's actually happening here. So that part is being done. But why, if we run it again, we're still not going to get anything, Ali? Correct. So we've kind of, if there's sort of three sides to this, the first side is connect to the database and run the query, right? We have that. Connect to the database and run a query. And then we have the adapter that creates our layout and will loop through the data and render it into the proper views. So that's kind of the third part. That's probably the most complicated part. And all this code for this artist view holder and our Firestore Recycler adapter class, we have that. So the piece that's missing is the second piece. We're running the query here, and we've set up how the recycler handles it. So what's the step that's missing in the middle? Ali, I think you're on the right track. Yeah, so we have this artist list, but what we're going to need to do is take our query results, and we're never actually invoking any of this stuff. We're running the query, and we have code on the recycler end that says, hey, when you get a query result, do this, but we haven't joined them up. So everything we have, we need, but they're still not connected yet. It's basically running a query and ignoring the results, and over here saying to the recycler view, when we give you query data, here's what to do. But we're never actually giving those query results to the adapter. So that's the piece that we still need to do. So now, pass the query results to the recycler adapter for display. This is in my OnCreate after we write the query. So notice our adapter requires some options. So we've got to pass in a couple of options in order to get it to run. So we're going to use our Firestore Recycler options. We're going to call the builder. So this is where we say you are going to get objects of type artist. And then we call the set query method. So this is where we pass it our query results. So we are passing in Obviously, I missed something here. Let me think about it. Whoops. That's a constructor. So we're running the query. Now we need to hand those query results to our adapter. And basically, we're casting those results as type artist. So now our recycler knows, hey, I'm getting a list of artist objects. If you think about this in a way, just to compare it, it's kind of similar, just if we put it in context of something we're all familiar with. Let's just go here for a minute. So it's kind of the Firestore and Android equivalent of this. So if this is a .NET controller, right, our index method returns a view and passes a list of category objects. Right? And then at the declaration at the top of our index, it's saying this view expects to receive a list of categories. So we're really doing the same thing in Android now, taking something that's a little familiar. Our adapter, when we set up our adapter, we're declaring what type of object are we getting. And the view holder will be used to kind of bind it or represent it in the UI. So same thing here. We're setting up what type of data we're giving the adapter. And the adapter is already set up to accept artist data. So we obviously can't pass in something else here. We wouldn't pass in, wouldn't pass in song data. It's expecting artist data. Okay, so now we need this. We can put this class back in. I declared it originally, but it gave me an error because we didn't have an artist adapter. Yeah, I should check the spelling. It should. I called it adaptator. Thank you. Nice catch, Breer. So now we can declare our adapter at the class level. And once we run our query, so we're going to then pass the options to it. And the last thing we do is bind the adapter to the RecyclerView. So the RecyclerView has an adapter property. It's basically the data source property is the way you think of it. That's really what an adapter is. It's a source of data. So this is most of what we need for that second step. We ran the query, we set up the adapter to display stuff, but we never actually passed any data to our adapter and told it to bind. So that's kind of our step two. Now there's one other thing we need to do, and then I'm going to cross my fingers and hope this works. if we just go back here, it tells us that we do have stop and start methods, and we will want to override those. We can try it like this. Actually, I guess we can try it and run it. We'll see if we get data, but we may not. There may be a few other small things we need to do before our artist data will show up. We're getting warmer. Okay, so still no data yet. So now let's override. So we want to call on start of our superclass. And then we want to tell our adapter, if it exists, to start listening. Okay, wait a minute, bear with me for a second. And then we need an on stop. I'll figure out why. Oops. Sorry, it's on capital S. And in this case, we want it to stop listening. So if the user navigates back to another activity, or they navigate to the next one, and this activity is in the back stack, there's no need for that adapter to continue listening for changes. It'll listen again when the activity comes back to the top of the stack. So we can stop listening for data changes. The activity gets stopped. Start listening for changes if the activity starts or restarts. Okay, we'll see if we get any data now. Not sure if my app just crashed or what happened. Okay. Our class does not define a no argument constructor. I thought our artist class does define a no argument constructor. Oh, okay, interesting. We had this conversation last week. Do we need an empty constructor? And it seemed to work that we could create with an empty constructor. I think the issue is now in our code. So I'm getting this artist does not define a no argument constructor. So what's happening is this is instantiating, or somewhere in here when we're instantiating an empty artist. And we can't do this because we don't have an empty artist constructor. So we don't need this for adding. So not needed to add, but needed to read. So I'm going to put my empty constructor back. So now my RecyclerView takes those query results, passes them to my Firestore adapter of type artist. Our create method loads our layout template. And then as each artist gets bound, we can display. We may be able to make this a little simpler. And actually, one thing I'm realizing is that we never actually use this artist list. We're not binding to it. So we can actually remove it. We're never populating that list. So I can get rid of this. Just one second. The other thing I'm wondering, I'll get to your question in just one second, Vlad. I'm wondering if rather than calling this function over and over again from our bind, we might actually be able to just populate our text boxes in our bind method, rather than grabbing the values and sending them to another function, for that function to actually display the values in the UI. I'll maybe want to try this. I'm not going to do it right now, but we may be able to remove this display function and simply populate our template within the bind. We'll give that a try. You had a question? So if I see, so okay. I'm just thinking about that. You know what I want to check? While I have this open, I want to see if the listing's actually working, because that will influence my answer. So what I'm going to do, what I think I'm going to do, I'm going to open up my database and manually create, while this is visible, I want to manually create a new document. I want to see if this will listen and display it automatically, because whether it does or whether it doesn't might affect the answer. If it does, then you would, so Vlad, you're talking about, you would want not a real-time view, like you want a static view, and then you want the user to manually have to refresh it. Is that what you're? So the way we've done this is it's automatically bound to the, like there is no need for a refresh because it's real time and it's constantly listening to Firestore. I think we would have to do this in a slightly different way. So in that case, I think what we would have to do is this. Instead of using this kind of construct with a recycler adapter, in that case, we would probably want to use something like the mutable list and populate our query result into the mutable list, and then iterate through it and populate the we would populate it, because then it's a static list, right? Then it's not updating in real time. So that would be, there may be some other ways, but off the top of my head, that might be how I would do it. But here we're actually binding the query result directly, so it's real, so we get real-time updates. Okay, I'll try it too, just to show. So if I go to my console and go into my database, we'll take a break in a minute. So I'll just go in and manually add. Well, here I've added 21 pilots twice, so I'm going to go into this document. If I do this, I can probably keep them both open at once. Okay, so if I want to delete this document, my app is listening in real time to Firestore. So there's no need for me to refresh it. As soon as I deleted it, or if I want to edit something, it's listening, and this one actually moved because it always runs my query in alphabetical order. So I change the name from a name that started with a D to a name that started with an A, and it moves it up. So when we're using this adapter class with start listening, but I guess the other thing I'm just thinking, I can think of one other possibility. It might not be the most efficient, but notice it doesn't stop listening until we stop the activity. So I guess another option might be, you could manually call adapter.stopListening if you wanted it to not be listening for changes. Well, I mean, generally, I would think, I mean, in my view, generally, this is a good behavior. Like, keeping data in real time is like a big challenge for developers, and usually we have to jump through a lot of hoops to make this work. Oftentimes, our applications only show the data at the time we ran the query, and we don't get it in real time. So this is one of the nice things about Firestore and the adapter is it, I mean, yeah, it was a bit of a pain to set up, but once we have it, our data is real time. So if I'm on my app, I don't have to refresh or worry I'm looking at out-of-date data. I can see things as they're being added. I don't have an informed opinion for you as to the best way to do it. If you wanted static data that's manually to be refreshed, it's a fair question. I don't know, from a code perspective, this is simple because we have it working. We could just call stop. But this adds overhead because this is designed to show real-time data. If you wanted to just have static data, I would probably just run the query, stick it in a list, and then iterate through the list to populate the recycler. And then refresh would just run it all again. That's probably how I would do it. But I haven't tried, so I don't know. Yeah.
New items will pop up, and it will work in the background even if you have the application closed. So like if there's a new entry in the database, the user will get a push notification. So like something updated.
Yeah, yes, it's possible to do that. Let's just see. There would be. There's definitely a way to do it. I would just have to think about what method you would invoke it from. So you could use an intent to create a notification, for example. But I'd have to think about where in the life cycle it would happen. I'm not quite sure. But there should be a way that, yes, you could trigger a notification when the data is changed. But I'd have to think about how. It's a fair question. Ron? So here you're only seeing one. Right. I saw that for hours this week, trying to figure out why, thinking my data is showing, why is it only showing one? Then I tried reversing the order of the query, so it's showing you the first one, right? Okay. Okay, let me think about this. First thing to check, is your layout height set to wrap content? Because it defaults to match parent. So in your item list. Nope, not in the recycler view, in our item list, in our layout template. It has a linear layout. There's a linear layout. It says match parent for height, change it to wrap content. So I think what's happening, Ron, because the height is match parent, that first row fills the entire activity. So all of them, every item is as tall as the whole screen. So change that to wrap content and try it and let me know if that fixes it. I'll change mine to match parent, and I think I should get the same result that you get when this happens. I should only see my first item in my recycler with match parent. Right? Because it's the whole height. Yeah. So that's an important gotcha. When you create this layout template and it uses the linear layout, it will default to match parent. So this one item, it's not that the other ones aren't there, you just can't see them because they're too big. No, there. If you scroll, it's actually here. If I click and drag, but you see each one, right, is the whole height of the parent window. So that's why we need to do it as wrap content. Simple fix. It took me far too long to figure that out. So in here, we could customize this however we want. If we wanted, an image beside each, we could add an image view and we could render that. There's other things we could do. Whoops. Okay, it's 10:03. So here's what we'll do. We will take a break. And then here's what I'm going to have you do. After the break, you can do your quiz. It's multiple choice. It's very short. Okay, it's worth, it's just part of your 10% labs quizzes mark. So it's worth somewhere between 1% and 2% of your grade. Okay. So you can do the quiz. I'll actually open up the quiz now. So you can take a break if you want. You can do the quiz now. Afterwards, all we're going to do with this is, and it will be optional. If you want to stay and do it, I'm happy to help do it. I'm going to suggest adding some additional functionality here that you can try to implement, and I can try to help you with. If you have other things you need to do, that's fine. So we can work with adding some additional functionality in the templating. And the other thing is, I'll maybe take a stab at, I said, I want to see if we really need this function. I'm not entirely convinced that we need this separate display function. I want to try binding it inside of my bind view holder. I'll maybe try that when you guys do the quiz. Okay. So the quiz you need to do, the other stuff you can stick around and do, and we can play around with this method, or you can go, I will leave that up to you. Okay, so the quiz, I think, is now open. So I'm going to stop the video stream. I will push a version to get